The Italian Radio Hour is sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.
Buonasera a tutti. Good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome back any new listeners and anyone listening online at khbradio.com. Also, be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past episodes. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo, grazie per essere con noi, anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. Last week we had a wonderful conversation with Silvia Gambi e Tommaso Santi on their eye-opening documentary Stracci. A journey that looks at fashion with the eyes of those who have always recycled used clothes and fabrics for centuries, transforming textile waste into a new raw material and the environmental impact of fast fashion. Starting from Prato in Tuscany and then heading off around the world, this fascinating journey illustrates the stories of this extraordinary, centuries-old and highly topical circular economy experience, that of recycling of wool by the textile industries in the Prato district. Stracci is also available for you on Amazon Prime, and I will definitely recommend you watch it, and it was also shown in the last edition of the Italian Film Festival USA. But before we get to our guest tonight, let's find out the answer to last week's trivia question. What does tutto fa brodo mean? Everything makes broth. That will be the literal translation. Well, this expression dates back to the Middle Ages when people used to eat broth every day. And obviously, they would use anything that was available to them to make their individual broth. So the expression now has entered the Italian language in a very common use, to the extent that it's similar to it's all grist to the mill, which means everything counts. So, for instance, if you're trying to put together about $20 and a friend gives you, it says, I only have $2.50, you will say, give it to me, tutto fa brodo, everything counts. So I hope you enjoy this little language trivia. So tonight we'll have two very special guests to help us understand the differences and the similarities between the Italian immigration in the West and the Italian immigration on the East Coast. Our guest will be Marianna Gatto, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles, and Melissa Marinaro, the Director of the Italian American Program at the Senator John Heinz History Center. Ma prima, pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org. Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm very honored to introduce tonight's guests. Marianna Gatto is the Executive Director and co-founder of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles, as well as a historian and author with 2 decades of experience in nonprofit leadership, education, and museums. Marianna has served as the director of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles since 2010. She wrote and co-curated the museum's award-winning permanent exhibition and oversees educational programming, temporary exhibitions, grant writing, and majors gift, among other projects. Marianna's research focuses on Italian Americans in the West. She was awarded the Cavaliere dell'Ordine della Stella d'Italia, Knight of the Order of the Star of Italy, by the Italian Republic in 2021. Melissa Marinaro has a BFA in photography from Columbia College Chicago and an MA in art history with a concentration in the history of photography from Savannah College of Art and Design. Melissa has worked at the Art Institute of Chicago in Museum Education, the Chicago History Museum in Special Collections, and was the interim director of education at Intuit, the Center for Intuitive and Outsider Art. Since joining the History Center staff in January 2013, Marinaro has cultivated significant artifact and archival collections related to post-war Italian immigration to Western Pennsylvania. The Passionists, first monastery in North America, Italian folk revival troupe I Campagnoli, former Vice Consul of Italy in Pittsburgh Joseph D'Andrea, and local Italian-American businesses. Her research interests include post-war Italian immigration, Italian-American identity and oral history, and storytelling as a research device. Marinaro is currently the exhibition review editor for the Journal of Italian-American Review. Benvenute Marianna e Melissa, buonasera.
Buonasera. Thank you for having us.
Melissa, you also
Ciao.
with us.
Ciao.
So it is so great to actually, we're in Pittsburgh, the city of bridges. So I wanted to connect the two coasts in this lovely, and I believe it's going to be a very insightful conversation to discuss the experience of the Italian immigrants that settled on the East Coast and on the West Coast, to see if we can draw some similarities and some differences. And before we get on to the nutshell of tonight's episode, I think our guests would like to find out a little more about your background. And but before we even get to it, it's always your connection to Italy. So maybe, Melissa, if you would like to start first, you can tell us a little bit about your family and what part of Italy they immigrated from. And then, Marianna, if you would like to answer the same question.
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying that I am an Italian mutt. I am only half Italian on my father's side, and even my father is representing three different parts of Italy. My nonna's family came from Fara San Martino in the province of Chieti, so we grew up with a lot of cuisine from Abruzzo. And then my dad's paternal grandparents, I had a great-grandmother from Sicily. She was from Marianapoli, and a great-grandfather who was from the province of Benevento. He was from a town called Castelvetere. So I am Southern Italian, and those are the regions that we trace our ancestry back to.
Wonderful. And Marianna, how about yourself? How about your family?
So my family hails from Sicily and Calabria. In Sicily, it's a little town called Lucasicola, which is in the province of Agrigento, between Agrigento and Palermo. And the Sicilian side of my family actually entered the United States through the port of New Orleans, as many Sicilians did, and they worked in the sugarcane industry before continuing west to Colorado, where both my father and my grandmother were born. Interestingly enough, this town in Colorado was also a big steel manufacturer, and it was hailed the Pittsburgh of the West. Now, on the Calabrese side, my grandfather came in through Canada, and he initially settled in Pittsburgh, first in Point Marion and then in New Kensington. And I actually still have Gatto cousins in the area, hopefully who are tuning in today.
All the roads lead to Pittsburgh. That's my new idiom. So New Kensington, Pittsburgh, yeah, everyone somehow ends up in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And well, just because, you are of Italian American origin, it doesn't necessarily make you overnight, the director or co-founders of Italian American museums. So let's start with you, Marianna, first. How did you develop eventually have your interest, and which became your passion and now your mission, these to promote the Italian American culture? So how did you evolve into the position that you currently hold?
Well, I think it could probably be traced back to the time that I was very young. I always gravitated to history, and specifically Italian American history. It was just something that just always kind of ignited this spark in me. I studied history and education in grad school, and would go into first into education and then into museum administration. But what really, I think, drew me to this, to what became the museum was growing up in Los Angeles, where there was less of a mirror for Italian Americans. And I often wondered, well, how did we end up here? There's not very much written about Italian American history in Los Angeles at that time. And it was in the early 90s that I learned about a building on the edge of downtown that had been the Italian community's gathering place in the early 1900s. And I was just floored. I walked into the building for the first time, and there was, at that time already an effort being made to restore this building that had kind of, been abandoned over the years, had kind of suffered from years of neglect. And I said, this needs to be a museum, and I want to be the director. And that was kind of my lips to God's ears moment. Clearly, it didn't happen overnight. It was many years after that the museum project reached fruition. But sometimes it's important, I think, to take a step back at our lives, at our careers, and realize, wow, this has been quite a journey. And sometimes making those types of statements, you never know where they're going to lead you.
Indeed, that's actually fantastic. Melissa, what was your path to that led you to become the director of the Italian American Collection at the History Center?
Sure. I had a different journey than Marianna. I knew I always wanted to work in a museum, and it was an experience I had early in my college years. I had a professor who was a curator, and I really liked that idea that you could use, at the time it was art, you could use it to teach. And so I went to graduate school knowing that the goal was to work in a museum. And I actually grew up in the Midwest. I'm originally from the Detroit area, and for years I lived and worked in Chicago, and I worked in art museums. And the position at the History Center opened up to work in the Italian American program, which is a program that was established at the History Center in 1990. And it was established because the community here in the southwestern region of Pennsylvania approached the History Center and wanted to know, what's the work being done to preserve the story of Italian Americans? We know there's so many here, and we know that you can look at the buildings and different things here in the region and know that's a contribution of Italian Americans, but what's here at the museum? So when I saw that job posting, I thought, that sounds great. I would get to work in a museum, but I get to work with a subject that is so personal because that's my background. And I took a leap of faith and applied for the job, and they were I was very fortunate. They took a risk on me, being someone who came from a different kind of training. But museums, there's a lot of protocols we all follow. We do things at a certain level, and we document and collect. And so it was great to think about how material culture could be used to tell the story of Italian immigrants here in America. And then also recognizing that's American history. So it's wonderful to be able to take the narratives from our community and amplify those and be able to talk about larger subjects and also teach our community and share it back with them.
Wonderful. And so Marianna has shared something about the building. There is a little fun fact about the History Center. Melissa, would you like to share it with our audience? What was it before becoming the History Center?
The History Center was an ice house. It was the Lake Chautauqua Ice House. And as a lot of buildings in the Strip District of Pittsburgh, they were built for cold storage. And for a time, even after Lake Chautauqua moved on as a company, the Heinz company had storage in that building. And we were able to purchase it in the 1990s. And we renovated it. We actually used to be in a smaller building in the neighborhood of Oakland when we were primarily an archive. And when we made the switch to the History Center's facility in the Strip District, we were able to really grow our collections and our exhibits.
Wonderful. Marianna, let's come back to you. People relate to Los Angeles as Hollywood, and I'm sure the Italians didn't come to become the next Valentino there. So let's dive into the nutshell of the conversation. Can you give us an idea of who settled in that area? What were some of the professions? What are some of the names that we might still recognize or products? So take us to the Italian immigrant experience on the West Coast.
Certainly. So when you look at the history of Italian Americans in Los Angeles, you notice several distinct groups who are largely defined or divided by the time period in which they settled in the region. One of the things that surprises people the most about Italian American history in Los Angeles is that Italians began settling in the city in the very early days of the city, in the 1820s, decades before California became a state, before the Civil War, before there even was an Italy. And today, Los Angeles is home to the nation's fifth largest Italian American population. The early group of immigrants, those who arrived between 1827 and 1880, more or less, were often drawn to the region for its agricultural offerings, viticulture, winemaking, fishing. Some came to Los Angeles after first going to Central California, Northern California, being drawn by the gold rush. Sometimes, or in many cases, these were Italians who had some means. They were a little bit better off financially than the group that would follow. You have to remember that arriving in California during that era was not an easy task. California was this remote outpost in the West, especially before the railroad connected it with the rest of the nation. So this was a group that was determined to come here. And often they were, what we would call transmigrants. They worked their way westward from place to place, and they often were a little bit more acclimated than those who had just, kind of arrived off the boat, so to speak, in places like New York or Boston. Some even worked their way north through Central America, South America, Mexico. I would say that the greatest legacy of this group was that their contributions to the state's agricultural development. Italians introduced various crops to the region: broccoli, bell pepper, varieties of citrus. They really helped make the region an agricultural giant. They also helped advance the winemaking industry, which had been, first introduced during the Spanish era, but it was really the Italians who helped advance it, make tremendous strides in advancing the industry. The winemaking center of the state of California prior to Prohibition was actually Los Angeles, not Napa. And there were over 100 wineries in Los Angeles at the time of Prohibition. They would also, of course, help develop the fishing industry. The West Coast tuna industry was born in Los Angeles. And many Italians, their rite of passage was, the canneries, working at the canneries. This early group of Italian settlers often found, a hospitable climate, one that was more welcoming in many respects than elsewhere in the nation. There were, those vast open spaces, an agriculturally based economy, a Mediterranean climate. They, while their East Coast counterparts were often working in factories and sweatshops, the Italians of Los Angeles were farming and fishing. And beyond, the natural environment, this early group also found kind of a more hospitable social cultural climate. Remember that Los Angeles was founded by Spain, right, as a colony of Spain, and had a Latin culture, the Catholic religion. So Italians, were welcomed in this land for the most part in those early years, while, elsewhere in the nation they were facing anti-Catholic sentiments. So that early group was able to achieve upward mobility oftentimes at an earlier time than their counterparts elsewhere. And one of the last things I'd like to mention is that many people are surprised to learn is that Los Angeles was at one time home to several Italian enclaves, and the museum is located in one of the oldest, historic Little Italies that once again existed in the city.
Mm-hmm. I have two small questions for you before we move to Melissa with the same question. So you do you have, obviously, because this was pre-Italy immigration, so to speak. But are there some territories that you can trace back people coming from? We can't call them region because they didn't exist yet. So, but
yeah. So many came from places like Lombardia, Piemonte. We had some who were Ticinese. And Genovese, they were, those were some of the, among that early group, those areas were well represented.
And the other question is, obviously, because you said, you talked about their contribution in winemaking, what happened during Prohibition? Did they turn into a different business, or were clever enough to maybe come up with alternatives, maybe alcohol-free? Can you tell us something?
Yeah, so it was kind of a little bit of everything. So Prohibition did shutter many wineries, many wineries and breweries, for that matter, threw in the towel. Others, including the San Antonio Winery, which is it's the oldest family-owned winery in Los Angeles, Italian-owned, that is, transitioned into manufacturing sacramental wine. So they received special permission from the church to make sacramental wine. Others would go into juice or grape products. Some were a little bit more clever and created medicinal tonics or things that were referred to as grape bricks, which were basically dehydrated grapes. That were consolidated into like a box, and you could take those home and make juice. Or if you, or on the package, there were often instructions for how to not make wine.
Wink, wink.
And so some of the, some of the wineries, found interesting ways to survive. Others stockpiled their inventory, anticipating the eventual overturn of Prohibition. But in many respects, Prohibition really devastated the local wine industry, and it never really recovered.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you for painting this interesting picture for us. Melissa, the floor is all yours. Tell us about the immigration on the East Coast.
Sure. Well, we here in Pittsburgh see ourselves not wholly as East Coast. We're mid-Atlantic, but we are on the western side of the mountain range. And so we don't see the migration here until really the late 1870s. And that's in part because in 1873, 1874, we start to see strike breakers getting sent to the small towns of western Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio. And that's because the working conditions were not very good. Many of the native-born Americans didn't want to work those jobs. And so they were bringing in both African Americans from southern states who wanted to migrate north, and they were also bringing in immigrants who were coming in through Ellis Island. And in that early period, they started to see success in part because they recognized that the language barrier was preventing a lot of these immigrants coming from Italy from understanding the conditions they were agreeing to, what they were signing up for. And so we all have heard that old adage about the streets being paved in gold in America. And the news of the work that there was, especially in Western Pennsylvania, that traveled back to Italy. And here we have communities that came from all over the country. So we have both northern and southern communities represented. We, of course, have a lot of southern Italians that came from Sicily, Calabria, Basilicata, Campania, Abruzzo, Molise, and then we also have those folks that came from Lombardy, Veneto, Friuli, Tuscany. So we have quite a mix here in terms of how Italy is represented across our region. And we also had a variety of experiences. I mentioned mining at first, but we also had people who did general labor, and so that could be anything from street paving, a lot of street sweeping and cleaning, especially in the 1880s, and that would have been the work of those enclaves that were living downtown and approximate to downtown. But then you have the coal patches and the rural experiences for those folks who are living where we're unearthing all of the raw minerals that Western Pennsylvania, we're so rich with that, and it's needed for the great industry that developed here. So that's a pretty common story where we see what would have been a peasant and mainly agricultural class of Italians that came to Western Pennsylvania, usually via Ellis Island, but that is not always the case. And in our collection, we have documented a lot of different migration experiences where people may have started in Cleveland. They may have started even farther afield. We've heard of people who went out to Colorado, went out and worked in some mining situations, and then made their way back east because they had family here.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Before we dive into talking about your individual collections, just a brief pause for a commercial break. Applying for dual citizenship? Need documents translated? Istituto Mondo Italiano provides certified translation and interpretation services in 20 different languages. Be sure to visit us at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org. So we are back with Marianna Gatto, Executive Director and Co-founder of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles, and Melissa Marinaro, the Director of the Italian American Program at the Senator John Heinz History Center. So because you were touching upon the collections and the material that is available at the Heinz History Center, Melissa, let's kind of give our listeners an idea of what they could find in the museum, and not only just the visual artifacts, but maybe the oral histories and so forth.
Sure. We have three main areas that we collect in. We have objects, and those would be all of our three-dimensional items. And we have a display that's out long-term on our fourth floor in our special collections gallery. And that's nice because that gives you an idea of all the different areas we have collected about: religious and spiritual life, domestic life, trades and professions, foodways, entertainment and culture. But we also have a wonderful library and archives, and that's a space which is open to the public and researchers. And that's where you're able to access our photographs, our documents, and we have quite a lot of documents from individuals and families, but also mutual beneficial societies, businesses. And then, of course, our oral histories are one of our richest resources because those are audio files and transcripts where we interview folks and ask them about their experiences, whether it's the immigrant talking themselves about the migration journey or someone in the family who is relaying the history and the stories. So we have first, second, and third generation Italian Americans, and we have nearly 400 of those that we've been recording since the mid-90s.
Wonderful. Marianna, I have not had the pleasure yet to come out to Los Angeles, but definitely it's first on my to-visit list. So tell us a little bit about how the museum is organized, and also if you have any current exhibit that people should get on that plane and come and see you.
Okay, well, so lots to cover there. What I think makes the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles, or IAMLA as we refer to it, unique is that a very small percentage of our visitors are of Italian extraction. We estimate that to be about only 15% of our visitors are of Italian heritage. And so, kind of confronting that or realizing that, we create content, whether, both our permanent exhibitions and our temporary exhibitions to, be relatable, to be relevant to our diverse visitors. So our permanent exhibition is arranged both chronologically and thematically. It looks at themes such as, the early Italian settlers, what their experiences were in the region, the little Italies that came to be, that middle period of history, the contributions that Italian Americans have made to not only the region's culture, but the nation's culture. We can't really tell the story of Italians in Los Angeles without telling the story of Italian Americans as a whole. So, while I touched upon that early period, those first settlers, the majority of Italians to settle in the region came, during that post-unification of Italy, that era. And they hailed from Italy's south, primarily from the regions of Puglia, Sicily, Calabria, Campania. Also a large number of them also came from elsewhere in the United States. They, including places like Pennsylvania or New York, Louisiana. And so the permanent exhibition is, in addition to being accessible at our brick and mortar location, is also accessible in its entirety online. And we love to see people from all over the world interacting with its content. Interestingly enough, one of our permanent exhibitions, which examines anti-Italianism, is the exhibition that visitors spend the most time with. Both in person and online. And we really love to kind of use this as a teaching tool that examines the, various immigration experiences in this nation. So in addition to our permanent exhibition being accessible online, the majority of our collection, we have about 5,000 items in our collection that's ever-growing, is also searchable online. And prior to COVID, now we're kind of picking back up again, but we did 2 temporary exhibitions each year, and now we're resuming that. Our current temporary exhibition is called Woven Lives, exploring women's needlework from the Italian diaspora. And it basically examines the experiences of Italian women, many of whom settled in the United States, as told through needlework. So knitting, crochet, lace work, you name it. And this exhibition has been extremely popular. And I know we're probably going to be touching upon this later in our chat, but we would love everybody to get on a plane and come visit the museum. But there is a
How
chance
about bringing it
that,
to us?
Okay, I'll pause on that one.
Yes, so sorry for the interruption, but we have this idiom also in Italian. If se Maometto non va alla montagna, la montagna viene da Maometto. If Mahoma doesn't go to the mountain comes. Mm-hmm. So no, but actually this is an interesting question for maybe both of you and whoever wants to answer it first about museums collaborating, or how delicate are these collections to be indeed transferred to a different location temporarily. So maybe, also Melissa, if you want to talk about, I don't know if you have had any collection traveling to the History Museum or vice versa, one of your collections or items going somewhere out. What does that entails?
Sure. And we at the History Center regularly work with other institutions. I mean, most notably, we are an affiliate of the Smithsonian. So we do a lot of collaboration with the Smithsonian. And we did have an exhibition, this would be last year, American Democracy, where what was interesting was we put together both Smithsonian objects and objects from our collection in order to tell a story about American democracy, but looking through the lens of the experience in Western Pennsylvania. And I want to make this point because I think Marianna touched on it, and it's a great way to think about Italian-American history, that it is a great way to talk about immigration in general, and talk about immigration history and to make parallels to today. And so we have also found that because in American democracy, we did have an area that was a gallery we added that looked at the experience of naturalizing and what historically has that process been, because that's the thing that I find as I speak with folks about their family history. There can be confusion because our policy changed. And so there were different experiences of people naturalizing and becoming American citizens, or even in some cases not becoming American citizens or losing their citizenship. And so that was an area where our collections, and particularly our Italian-American collection, was very valuable in giving our community today a sense of what historically have people gone through in order to become an American citizen. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that was a lot of fun, and it was a great collaboration with other institutions because through this we've developed a nice relationship with the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. And it's allowed us to learn a lot about how our collections, our historic collections and exhibitions, can teach people today who are training to take the citizenship exam. So it's been very fun to see the way that those kind of collaborations can grow into powerful networks that then help our citizens, whether they are of Italian extraction or not.
Mm-hmm. Marianna, in the Woven Lives exhibit that you currently have at the museum, does it span across different time periods? Does it get up to today's dates? Because there are still a lot of people devoting time in needlework and possibly passing that knowledge to the younger generation.
Yeah, so basically, the exhibition in a nutshell examines the evolution of needlework. In Italy, it was a way that a woman demonstrated that she had been properly reared and was, ready for the responsibilities of adult life. Then, following the women's arrival in the United States, needlework often became a way that she helped support her family and gain some economic independence, going to work in, factories. Sometimes the women's experiences in the factories, and we're all familiar with some of the, the horrific tragedies and the less than ideal working conditions of these sweatshops in the late 1800s, early 1900s, would lead some of these women to become activists. And we also examined some of the Italian immigrant women who helped usher in some of the changes and the rights that many of us take for granted today. Then, many times the women's daughters did not follow their mothers into the factories. They went into other trades or obtained educations where they had opportunities beyond factory work. And at the same time, we saw, consumerism, of course, increase in the United States, and ready-made goods. Needlework often became something that, grandma did, or that was just too time-consuming for that next generation, and some of these skills were lost. Fast forward to more recent history, we see women, or just people in general, rediscovering this craft, passing it on to subsequent generations, and also having a greater appreciation for these handmade items that, nonna made, decades ago and are now family heirlooms.
Mm-hmm. And
so
also
this exhibition kind of looks at all those various themes.
Yeah, even because for a young bride-to-be, the idea of the corredo, I think it's called trousseau, it was indeed part of the dowry and everything. So it was a sense of pride. Will this exhibit travel somewhere? Do you have any plans for it?
Yes. So currently, we haven't officially announced this yet, but our current plans involve it traveling next to New York. And once we, can announce all the details, we'll be happy to share them, with you, and we'd love for you to pass them on to your visitors. After that, we're not entirely sure. There is quite a bit of interest in it. I should also mention that, our previous exhibitions have traveled elsewhere in California and Nevada. This would be the first time that it, travels a little bit further. And we really love the idea of this. These temporary exhibitions are one of a kind. They're unique to the museum, and we've, in the past done some truly innovative temporary exhibitions, Italian Americans in animation, for instance. We did another one that looked at the multi-layered history of Sicily told through the lens of the Sicilian cart, or the Carta Siciliano. Mm-hmm. That was a collaboration between the Musca Museum of Sicily and Dolce & Gabbana. And, after these exhibitions end at our institution, they are, placed in storage, or they're, the elements that were on loan are returned to their lenders. And, we also see how many institutions, suffer from lack of programming. It's like they have the location, but programming is often where they need some support. And we would love in the coming years to continue to collaborate with institutions across the nation to share these exhibitions, because, of course, the more people who experience them, the more people who have access to this knowledge. That's really the heart of our mission. So, yeah.
Melissa, I do have a couple of questions for you. One is, first, I saw you a couple of days ago during the Russell Shorto presentation. What is coming to the museum that people might not know yet?
Well, I'm excited to say we have a couple big events happening that the Italian American program is involved in. First is that our bocce tournament is coming back on Saturday, August 20th. And for those who are tuned in that are familiar with the tournament, that's how we raise money for the program at the History Center. And it's what allows us to do this great work in the community. So that will be back, and it will be at Heinz Field this year. So you can visit the History Center website or reach out to me to get more information. We'll also be hosting the Italian American Studies Association Conference here in Pittsburgh,
Wonderful.
August 27th through 29th. Mm-hmm. That is something we are co-hosting with the University of Pittsburgh's Italian Department. And we cannot wait to welcome national and international scholars of Italian American studies to come here and to partake in the great resources we have. The theme is mining the diaspora. Mm-hmm. So a big focus on looking at collections, not just at institutions and museums, but thinking about family collections, thinking about organizational collections, all those kinds of things that we know are embedded in our communities that tell the story of Italian immigrants coming to the United States and what they did. And then finally, our big push at the end of 2022 is this year is the 50th anniversary of the Immaculate Reception. And so we will be doing a big celebration at the History Center with our friend Franco Harris to celebrate that wonderful historic play. And, as we always joke, everything points to Pittsburgh. We say the same thing at the History Center. So we're very glad to be able to celebrate, and we'll be talking, of course, about Franco's Italian army during that time, because speaking of women's needlework, we have some really wonderful representations of needlework from some of the Franco's fans. We have a great not crochet, but a needle-pointed pillow that a woman made with the Franco's Italian Army logo.
Wonderful. So it looks like you're really busy, but you're also busy making room at the museum for something that is also coming in. Can we talk about a big object that is coming to the museum?
What is you'll have to tell, what is a big object, because we have a lot of big objects.
I know for us, well, I think it's a printing.
The Frediani collection. Okay,
yes.
So big. Well, yeah, 10 linear feet. It's somewhat big. We've got a nice collection that it's already at the History Center, but right now I'm working on making it more publicly accessible. For those in the audience that might remember La Unione, that was one of the Italian language newspapers that we had here in Pittsburgh, and Frediani Printing Company is the company located in the Strip District that for years printed the paper. And so I'm so excited to say that we now have a near complete run of the paper from 1957 to 2004. So for anyone who lived in Western Pennsylvania and is interested in doing family history research, or even just getting an understanding of what was the community concerned about, there's a lot of great content in these newspapers, and we're just so pleased to be able to preserve them and provide access to them.
Wonderful. Marianna, let's get back to you, because obviously the museums during the COVID and the closures and the lockdown, they got hit by the lack of ability to open their doors. But everyone seems to have reinvented themselves by offering different programs, obviously with the online component, or maybe now more of a hybrid. Can you share some of the initiatives that were going on in the museum? And this second question is actually for both of you. How to still create interest in the newer generation in their past, once there are like 3 or 4 generations remote from their ancestors. So first, let's talk a little bit about creative programs during COVID, and then let's altogether address the other question.
Sure, certainly. So because we had such, a kind of an active online presence before the pandemic, we were able to transition to online programming better. And so, during that time, we did everything from, virtual exhibition tours to a, culinary educational videos that examined, the history of iconic Italian dishes, everything from cannoli to some of the more controversial plates, fettuccine Alfredo, that were super popular with audiences. I think when you start talking about food, it's such a language, a universal language. We also presented genealogy webinars, concerts, just a plethora of events. Now, of course, we are have returned to in-person programming. We've also presenting things in hybrid format. Next month we'll be doing another needlework workshop that's related to our current exhibition. And then for our upcoming exhibition, A Real Boy, The Many Lives of Pinocchio, which will open in the fall, we just have just an incredible amount of activities lined up. And we really are so happy to be seeing people return to the museum again, and, hope that we can kind of continue in that direction.
Okay, and we're pretty much coming to the conclusion of the program. From both museums, some of the initiatives that might be more focused towards the youth, whether it's with a focus on specific objects in the collections, or maybe partnerships with schools, or just some other activities that you do have in your programming to make this conversation relevant to the younger generation. Melissa, do you want to go first, maybe?
Sure. I'll say that we have found, especially when we have school groups at the History Center, we love to do archives experiences with them because it's a part of the collection that they can handle. And we have found that students really enjoy getting to put on the white gloves, getting to go through some of the files. And, even as young as late elementary, we see that engagement with history starts to get students excited at a young age about the subject. And so the more hands-on experiences that we're able to develop with them at the museum and as a part of our programming, I think that really sticks with our students, because our collections, whether you have a personal connection to that ethnic group or not, I think that we have really creative and open-minded children in this generation that's engaging with our content. And so we just love to see what direction they'll go in when we just give them that beginning introduction to working with these kinds of materials.
Wonderful. And for those of you who are interested also in having a visual aid, I don't want to say aid, it's a beautiful publication that Melissa Marinaro has put together, the highlights from the Italian-American collection, the Western Pennsylvania Stories. I highly recommend it. And I know also you, Marianna, have a couple of publications out that focus more on your region. Can you tell us a little bit? I do have the Los Angeles, Little Italy, but I think you're working on something else that should be released.
Yes. So obviously COVID was a bit of a game changer. I've held back, but my next book is called Beyond Little Italy, Italian Americans in the City of Angels, and that will be coming out in the coming months. But of course, if you're interested in more information about the museum, the website, which contains the curricula, teaching tools for educators, all the items I mentioned, is www.iamla.org.
Wonderful. I cannot thank you enough, Marianna and Melissa, for this very pleasant conversation. And, obviously with the auspices that everyone patronizes their museums, not once, but many times, because every time you look at a collection, you always pick up something else and you always relate to that experience differently. So in bocca al lupo, continue doing the wonderful work that you do. And I hope to meet you in person, Marianna, and Melissa, I know that I will see you again soon. Buona serata.
Before long.
Well, unfortunately, our hour is up. Il Big Ben ha detto stop, so it's time for us to say arrivederci alla prossima. We want to thank you for tuning in into the program, and if you have any questions or comments, you can contact us at theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. So the next week, who are going to be our guests? Well, I would say don't miss next week's episode as we talk about one of the most iconic landmarks in the American landscape, Mount Rushmore, and the man behind giving the expressions to the presidents, Friuli-born Luigi Del Bianco. We will spend also some time discovering the beautiful region of Friuli Venezia Giulia with travel journalist Michael Paul, contributor to the very famous Dream of Italy platform with Katie McCabe. And remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, please visit our website at www.istitutomonditaliano.org and click on the Italian Radio Hour tab. Vorremmo ringraziare le nostre ospiti Marianna Gatto e Melissa Marinaro, il nostro sponsor Istituto Mondo Italiano e alla Boara per la Musica. And finally, before we leave, here is our trivia question for next week. What does "o mangi questa minestra o ti butti dalla finestra"? Again, what does O mangi questa minestra o ti butti dalla finestra min. You can send in your answers to theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. If you're not living in the Pittsburgh area or you might be out of town, remember you can always catch us streaming live at khbradio.com every Thursday at 5 p.m. And be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour. Until next time, alla prossima. Ciao ciao!
Ci sta facendo caro fulla dormo tu e culirami con voglia la via ancora non è vero scomina Moncino leva all'amorosa mia.
The Italian Radio Hour has been sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.